"What kind of caddy are you? Get over here." The roar echoed across the perfectly manicured green. Richard Montgomery, a man whose wealth was only surpassed by his arrogance, glared at the teenage boy standing beside him. The boy, barely 16, simply lowered his head, his face hidden under the brim of his cap. He adjusted the heavy golf bag on his slender shoulder without a word. The day had started poorly for Richard, and as was his custom, someone else had to be at fault. Today that someone was his caddy. Every sliced shot, every ball that found its way into a sand trap, every misjudged putt was all the boy's fault. "Can't you even read the green? Are you blind?" Richard would bark, loud enough for the other players in his group to hear. They would shift uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with both the furious golfer and the silent caddy. They were here for a charity tournament, but there was nothing charitable about Richard's behavior. Through it all, the boy remained a pillar of calm. He'd hand over clubs, clean the balls, and rake the sand, his movements efficient and his face an unreadable mask. He endured the verbal onslaught, his silence a stark contrast to Richard's booming rage. After another disastrous hole, Richard was lining up a difficult shot. The boy stepped forward slightly and said in a quiet, steady voice, "Sir, the wind has shifted." "It's moving left," Richard scoffed, ignoring him completely. He swung with all his might, and the ball sailed beautifully. Right into the water hazard on the left, the boy didn't flinch. A few holes later, as Richard pulled out his driver for a long par 4, the boy spoke again. "A 3-wood might be safer here, sir. It's a narrow landing area." Richard shot him a look that could curdle milk. "When I want your opinion, I'll buy you one. I'll step back." Predictably, his drive went wide, landing him in thick rough. The boy's advice, though ignored, was always precise. A small, quiet truth in the storm of Richard's anger. It was as if he saw a different course, one where physics and strategy mattered more than brute force and ego. Just as Richard was about to tee off on the 14th hole, the sky, which had been growing dark, finally broke. A sudden downpour sent everyone scrambling for cover. The game was delayed, and the players hurried back to the clubhouse. Richard grabbed a table by the window, fuming about the interruption. As he nursed a drink, he overheard 2 clubhouse employees talking near the bar. "Did you see who got stuck with Montgomery today?" one said, shaking his head. "Yeah, poor Leo," the other replied. "The kid's a saint for putting up with that guy." The name didn't register at first, but then the conversation took a turn. "It's crazy, right? Leo could probably outplay everyone in that tournament with his eyes closed. I think he's a state junior champion, for crying out loud." Richard froze, his glass halfway to his lips. The second staffer nodded. "I know. It breaks your heart. He's only caddying to help pay for his mom's medical bills. She's really sick." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. He glanced across the room and saw Leo sitting alone in a corner, staring out at the rain, looking tired and worried. The boy wasn't just a caddy. He was a champion, carrying a burden far heavier than a golf bag. A wave of shame washed over Richard, so intense it made him feel sick. An hour later, the rain stopped and the sun reappeared. The call came to resume play. As they walked back to the 14th tee, the air between them was thick with unspoken words. Richard wanted to apologize, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. They arrived at a treacherous par 3 with a small green surrounded by water. It was a shot that demanded absolute precision, the kind of shot that had been eluding Richard all day. The other players made their shots, one landing safely, the other just missing the green. Now it was his turn. The pressure was immense. He felt the familiar anger rising, the urge to blame the club, the wind, anything but himself. But this time, something was different. He looked at Leo, who was standing quietly, holding the bag. For the first time all day, Richard saw not an incompetent servant, but a young expert waiting patiently. In a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "What do you think?" Leo looked surprised for a fraction of a second, then his eyes scanned the course. He checked the wind, the pin placement, the lie of the land. His expression was one of intense focus. The wind is coming from the right now, but there's a swirl near the green that will push it left," he said calmly. "It's playing longer than it looks. You'll need a 7-iron. Aim for the big oak tree just right of the flag, and let the wind and the slope do the work. Trust the club." A smooth, easy swing. There was no hesitation in his voice, only quiet confidence. Richard looked from the flag to the oak tree, then back at Leo. He took a deep breath, nodded, and pulled the 7-iron. He stepped up to the ball. Clearing his mind of everything but Leo's instructions, he focused on a smooth swing, just as the boy had said. The club made contact with a pure, crisp sound. The ball soared into the air, tracing a perfect arc toward the green. It flew directly at the oak tree. Then, as if guided by an invisible hand, it began to drift left, landed softly on the green, bounced once, and rolled directly toward the hole, stopping less than a foot from the cup. A gasp went through the small crowd of spectators, followed by a burst of applause. It was, without a doubt, the best shot of the tournament. After Richard tapped in the easy putt for a birdie, the round continued. But the dynamic had completely changed. Richard asked for Leo's advice on every single shot, and he listened intently. His game transformed. He was no longer fighting the course. He was working with it. At the end of the 18th hole, as the sun began to set, Richard finished with his best score in months. He shook hands with the other players and then turned to Leo. He was about to speak when he stopped. Words felt inadequate. Instead, he took off his expensive, tournament-logoed golf glove and handed it to the boy. He then reached into his wallet and pulled out a check he had received for a side bet he had won, signing it over to Leo. It was a significant amount. "I should have listened to you from the very start," Richard said, his voice full of genuine regret. "You're a phenomenal golfer, Leo. Not a phenomenal caddy. A phenomenal golfer." For the first time all day, a wide, genuine smile spread across Leo's face. He looked at the glove, then at Richard, and simply nodded. In that quiet moment of mutual respect, a game of golf had taught a powerful lesson about humility, and a true champion was finally recognized. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more.